Let me be very direct with you, because I find that when I am direct, people in Western media get uncomfortable, and that discomfort is itself revealing. Trump posted on Truth Social this morning, and I want to read this carefully because the words matter. I have ordered the United States Navy to shoot and kill any boat, small boats though they may be, that is putting mines in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. There is to be no hesitation. Shoot and kill, no hesitation. And then, within hours of that order being posted publicly for the world to read, Iran's Revolutionary Guard seized the MSC Francesca, operated by the world's largest container shipping group, and the Epaminondas, and escorted both vessels with 40 crew members to the port of Bandar Abbas. Now, I want to ask a simple question that I notice Western analysts are very carefully not asking. If the United States Navy has, as Trump posted this same morning, total control over the Strait of Hormuz, if no ship can enter or leave without the approval of the United States Navy, then how did Iran's Revolutionary Guard Board seize and escort two commercial vessels to an Iranian port inside that same strait on the same day that order was posted? I will answer that question because it has a very clear answer. And the answer is not comfortable for those who have spent the last 57 days telling their audiences that America is winning this confrontation. America has lost control of the Strait of Hormuz, not militarily. America's naval hardware is still there, 19 ships, 2 aircraft carriers, the most powerful surface fleet ever deployed to this region. Not legally. America's blockade of Iranian ports is still in effect, 31 ships turned around. But operationally, on the water, in the 33 kilometers of open sea that the entire global economy depends on, Iran's Revolutionary Guard is still doing what it chooses to do. And today, what it chose to do was seize the world's largest container group's ship while Trump was posting about total control. That gap between what Trump posts and what Iran does is the entire story of this conflict. And I want to explain why that gap exists, what it means, and where it leads. Let me explain what the shoot to kill order actually represents, because I think it is being analyzed backwards in most Western coverage. Western analysts are presenting this order as an escalation, as America raising the stakes, as Trump demonstrating resolve. I want to suggest a different reading. The shoot to kill order is not a demonstration of strength, it is a confession of a problem. When you have total control of a waterway, when, as Trump says, no ship can enter or leave without your approval, you do not need to issue public shoot to kill orders. You have control. Control is self evident. It does not require announcements. You issue shoot to kill orders publicly when you are trying to establish deterrence that your physical presence alone has failed to establish. You issue them when the activity you are trying to stop, mine laying in this case, has been happening despite your presence and you need to announce a new threshold. You issue them when the gap between your public claims of control and the operational reality on the water has become too visible to ignore. The shoot to kill order is not evidence that America is escalating from a position of strength. It is evidence that America has been unable to prevent Iran from doing what Iran has been doing in the Strait, closing it, opening it, charging tolls, seizing ships, laying mines, for 57 days despite the presence of 19 warships, including 2 aircraft carriers. I have been saying this since the war began. The geography of the Strait of Hormuz is not primarily a military question, it is a political question. And I want to explain the geography precisely because I think Western coverage consistently fails to communicate it accurately to its audiences. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. On the northern shore is Iran, specifically the Musandam Peninsula and the Iranian coastline running from Bandar Abbas westward. Iran has spent 40 years building military infrastructure in these mountains. Shore-based anti-ship missile systems positioned in terrain that American air power cannot fully suppress without risking the aircraft doing the suppressing. IRGC naval bases at Bandar Abbas and along the coast. Mine-laying capacity that does not require warships, it requires small boats, which can be launched from shore in minutes and recovered in minutes. Tunnel systems carved into the rock that shelter equipment, personnel, and weapons from airstrikes. Underground command centers. The geography is Iran's fundamental asymmetric advantage. America's carriers and destroyers are in open water, visible on radar, trackable by satellite.
Iran's capabilities are embedded in terrain. America can destroy every vessel Iran floats. Trump noted this morning that Iran's naval ships are, in his words, all 159 of them at the bottom of the sea. I will not contest the naval campaign's effectiveness against Iran's conventional fleet, but America cannot destroy the mountains. It cannot destroy the institutional knowledge and the physical infrastructure of an organization, the IRGC, that has spent 4 decades preparing specifically for the scenario of asymmetric maritime confrontation with a technologically superior adversary in this specific geography. The mines are not ships that can be sunk, they are objects placed in water by small boats launched from shore. Shooting the small boats does not remove the mines already placed. It raises the cost of placing future mines. But the IRGC has more small boats. The Iranian coast has more launching points. Iran has demonstrated for 57 days that it is willing to absorb significant costs in exchange for maintaining operational leverage in the waterway. Tripling your minesweepers is not the action of a party with total control. It is the action of a party with a serious ongoing mine problem that its shoot to kill order has not yet resolved. Now, let me address the MSC Francesca directly, because I think it deserves more analytical weight than it has received in the last few hours. MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company, is the world's largest container shipping group by capacity. It is a Swiss Italian company headquartered in Geneva. It is not an American company. It is not an Israeli company. Iran's IRGC claimed without providing evidence that the Francesca was linked to Israel. I want to be honest with your audience. That claim has not been verified, and the shipping industry and the Francesca's operators have disputed it. The IRGC's stated justification that the ship had tampered with navigation systems and endangered maritime security is the legal framework Iran has been applying to justify interdiction of vessels it considers to have violated its protocols for Hormuz transit. The MSC Francesca is not the story. The story is what the MSC Francesca represents. When Iran seizes an Iranian flagged vessel, that is an Iran America confrontation. When Iran seizes the world's largest container group's ship with 40 crew from multiple countries aboard, that is an Iran versus global trade confrontation. Every country whose exports move on MSC vessels, which is most of the world, now has a direct material stake in what happens to those 40 crew members and when those ships are released. Japan, South Korea, Germany, India, China, all of their economies depend on container freight costs that are set in part by whether vessels like the MSC Francesca can transit Hormuz without being seized. And this is where I want to challenge directly what I hear from Western analysts. I hear them say Iran is isolated, Iran is desperate, Iran is acting irrationally by seizing commercial ships. Let me tell you what I see instead. I see a country that has survived 57 days of the most intensive American bombing campaign since the Gulf War. Fordow, Natanz, Isfahan, Bandar Abbas, bombed, the supreme leader killed on the opening night. Air defenses degraded. The Iranian economy subjected to the most aggressive blockade attempted in the modern era, with 31 ships turned back and the country's oil ports interdicted by 2 American carrier groups. If you had told any Western analyst in January that Iran would withstand all of that and still be seizing the world's largest container company's ships inside the disputed Strait 60 days later, they would have called you unrealistic. And yet, here we are. The reason Iran has survived this is not Iranian military strength alone. It is the architecture that China built over the preceding decade. I want to be specific about this because I think it is the most important structural fact of this entire conflict, and it receives inadequate coverage in Western media. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPs, processed a single-day record of 1.22 trillion yuan, $179 billion during this conflict. Iran exported more oil in March 2026 than it did before the war began. Between 11 and 16 million barrels of Iranian crude moved to Chinese refineries through the Shadow Fleet, vessels that sail without transponders, that transfer cargo ship to ship in international waters, that deliver Iranian crude labeled as crude from third countries to refineries that do not ask questions. Iran's central bank warned internally that recovery could take 12 years under maximum American pressure. That recovery timeline assumes the oil revenue stops. The oil revenue did not stop, it increased. This is what I mean when Western analysts accuse me of being an apologist for Iran. I am not describing this to praise Iran or criticize America. I am describing it because it is what happened. The facts are documented by Lloyd's List, by the Atlantic Council, by Deutsche Bank, by tanker tracking services. The yuan payments happened, the shadow fleet deliveries happened, SIPs set records. These are not claims, they are documented transactions. And the consequence of that architecture, that decade of Chinese investment in Iran's economic survival capacity, is that America could bomb for 57 days, blockade for 57 days, kill a supreme leader, destroy a navy, and Iran is still there, still seizing ships, still charging tolls in yuan, still declaring the blockade a violation of the ceasefire, still refusing to come to the table until the blockade is lifted. And China, the country that built that architecture, has said absolutely nothing about any of today's events. That is not isolation. That is a country that has been given the economic infrastructure to resist. And the country that provided that infrastructure has no incentive to say so publicly today, tomorrow, or at the Beijing summit next month. Let me now say something about the American domestic political dimension of what is happening, because I think it is important and because it is rarely discussed honestly in Western media. Trump's Truth Social posts this morning contain a contradiction that any analyst should be willing to name. He posted that the U.S. Navy has total control of Hormuz and no ship can enter or leave without the approval of the United States Navy. He then posted the shoot to kill order, implicitly acknowledging that Iranian small boats are laying mines in the strait he just described as under total American control. These two statements cannot both be true simultaneously. If you have total control, mines are not being laid. If mines are being laid and you need a new shoot-to-kill order to address them, you do not have total control. This is not a complicated analytical point. It is a direct logical contradiction between two statements posted within hours of each other by the same person. In a functioning media environment, this contradiction would be the lead story. The question, Mr. President, if you have total control of Hormuz, why did Iran seize MSC Francesca inside it today? And why did you need to issue a shoot-to-kill order for mine laying that must still be ongoing? Would be asked directly and repeatedly until answered directly. Instead, what I observe is a media environment that covers the shoot-to-kill order as a demonstration of American resolve and covers the MSC Francesca seizure as an Iranian provocation, without connecting the two events into the single coherent picture they form. The picture they form is American control is not what it is claimed to be. Iran is operating in the Strait on its own terms, and the ceasefire that Trump extended indefinitely 2 days ago, which Iran called meaningless, and which Iran has violated at least twice since its extension, is not a ceasefire in any meaningful sense of that word. I am not saying this to be hostile to America. I am saying this because it is what the facts describe, and I would rather tell your audience what the facts describe than tell them a comfortable story that leaves them unprepared for what is actually happening. Now I want to discuss China and Russia because their response to today's events, the shoot-to-kill order, the MSC Francesca seizure, the 40 crew now in Bandar Abbas, is itself analytically important. China has said nothing. Russia has said nothing. I have heard some Western analysts interpret this silence as evidence that China and Russia have abandoned Iran or are distancing themselves from Iran's actions. I want to explain why that interpretation is wrong. China's support for Iran throughout this conflict has not operated through press statements. It has operated through the yuan payment system that kept Iran's oil revenue flowing when the blockade attempted to cut it. It has operated through the shadow fleet that delivered between 11 and 16 million barrels of Iranian crude to Chinese refineries during 57 days of American military operations. It has operated through CIPS, China's cross-border interbank payment system, which set a single-day transaction record of 1.22 trillion yuan, $179 billion, during this conflict. That infrastructure does not require Beijing to issue statements. It runs independently of whatever China's foreign ministry says on a given day. China's silence on the MSC Francesca is a calculation, not an abandonment. Beijing has a summit scheduled with Trump in May. China's strategic interest is to arrive at that summit having maintained plausible deniability on its support for Iran, while also having demonstrated through the CIEP's records, through the shadow fleet data, through the Yuan invoice documentation, that the economic architecture it built over the last decade is functional and durable. Breaking silence to condemn or defend the MSC seizure serves neither of those interests. Silence serves both. Russia's silence has a different mechanism, but the same strategic direction. Russia is collecting approximately $700 million per day in additional oil revenue because Brent crude is at $100 per barrel, 50% above pre-war levels. Every day this standoff continues is another day of that revenue. Russia's uranium offer, the proposal to store Iran's enriched uranium as part of a peace framework, is still on the table. America has not responded to it. If Russia speaks now about the MSC Francesca, it inserts itself into a maritime confrontation where it has no specific leverage and potentially disrupts the diplomatic positioning it has spent 57 days carefully building. Silence is the right strategic choice for Russia today, and Russia knows it. Let me close with what I believe comes next. And I want to be clear that this is my analytical assessment, not a hope or a preference. The shoot to kill order is now public. The minesweepers are operating at triple capacity. Iran has 40 crew members from multiple countries in Bandar Abbas aboard 2 seized commercial vessels. The ceasefire has no deadline. Iran's government is functionally divided between its diplomatic apparatus and the IRGC, which means that even if a deal is agreed at the negotiating level, the IRGC has demonstrated it will operate independently. Trump has no stated deadline and no clear path from the current standoff to a deal. 3 things will determine what happens in the next 72 hours. First, what happens to the MSC Francesca's 40 crew. These are civilian sailors from multiple countries. Their situation is not a bilateral Iran-America issue. It is an international humanitarian issue that involves the flag state of the vessel, the nationalities of the crew members, the home governments of every sailor now in Bandar Abbas, and the global shipping industry that depends on the principle of freedom of navigation. The longer these 40 people are held, the more governments that have carefully avoided taking a public position in this conflict are forced to take one. India summoned the Iranian ambassador weeks ago after IRGC gunboats fired on Indian ships. If Indian crew members are among the 40 aboard the Francesca, India cannot remain publicly neutral. Japan, which depends on Hormuz for 75% of its oil imports, cannot remain publicly neutral if Japanese chartered vessels or vessels carrying Japanese cargo are being seized routinely. Iran would serve its own broader interests by resolving this specific situation quickly and demonstrating that the seizure was a specific enforcement action rather than a general policy of seizing any commercial vessel that transits the Strait. Second, whether the shoot-to-kill order actually produces a kinetic incident in the next 48 hours. If a U.S. Navy vessel fires on and kills IRGC personnel in an Iranian small boat under the standing shoot-to-kill authorization, publicly issued, no hesitation required, that is qualitatively different from every previous escalation in this conflict. It is the first direct killing of Iranian military personnel by American forces in this war, as distinct from bombing campaigns against infrastructure and facilities. The IRGC does not ignore the killing of its personnel. It has a 40-year institutional history of responding to such events. The nature of that response, whether maritime, missile, proxy, or diplomatic, will determine whether the next phase of this conflict looks like managed escalation or unmanaged escalation. The difference between those two outcomes is the difference between a negotiated settlement in the next 2 months and a conflict that runs into the summer. Third, and most consequential for the long term, what China says or does not say if a kinetic incident occurs under the shoot-to-kill order. I have explained China's silence throughout this conflict as a calculated strategic choice, but calculations have thresholds. If American naval forces kill IRGC personnel in the Strait of Hormuz under a publicly posted presidential order, and the news cycle shows that on screens in Beijing and Moscow simultaneously, the silence calculation may change. Not because China is an ally of Iran in a military sense, China has been scrupulously careful not to be that, but because the legitimacy of the shoot to kill order, a U.S. president publicly authorizing lethal force against Iranian personnel in international waters, is the kind of precedent that has implications beyond the Iran conflict. It has implications for any future standoff in any waterway where American naval power is deployed against a country whose trade China depends on. Watch the 40 crew in Bandar Abbas. Watch the minesweepers in the Strait. Watch Beijing. Because I said at the beginning of this war that America would not achieve its strategic objectives without Chinese cooperation. I said Chinese cooperation would not be available on terms America would accept. 57 days later, the architecture China built is still running, Iran is still there, and Trump is posting shoot-to-kill orders while declaring total control. I was correct. And the next 72 hours will make that either more obvious or impossible to ignore.